Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Identity Insights. Today, we'll be bringing you an educational look at NFTs and DIDs based on a recent meetup that Indicio hosted. I think this discussion will be particularly helpful, especially to the newer among us, because they do a great job of introducing the concepts and defining the terms that they use, along with a couple differences in why you'd want to choose one or the other. Without further ado, let's jump into it.
To get started, this is a topic that I think most of us have some experience with some aspect and probably not with others. And so I thought we'd start with some definitions. And that way we can sort of level set a little bit. This is not intended to be very deeply technical, but of course, some of the technical details matter and part of the discussion. So, having a background will help. So let's start here a little bit. And Christina, if I could ask you to give us a working definition of an NFT.
Sure. So the textbook definition of an NFT is really blockchain-based tokens. They're definitely unique, and they contain unique data and identifiers. They've been designed to be transferable. Probably a lot of folks have heard about them in the context of digital artwork or collectibles. But really what they do is their representation of something that's a real world asset. Most folks probably already know that it's maintained on a blockchain, the Ethereum blockchain, or ETH as we like to call it. And so the ownership of an NFT is tied to an ETH address. And so from that perspective, it represents a private, secure kind of user-owned digital identity where we can do traceability with it. But it also has some limitations, which I anticipate we're going to be talking about today.
Awesome. So to clarify, NFT stands for?
Non-fungible tokens versus fungible tokens.
And what does that mean? What does fungible mean?
So fungible meaning, and actually it's really funny that you say that, because non-fungible meaning there's a fungible aspect and a non-fungible aspect. So it's a representation of something that's real, but it's actually in digital format. So it has two aspects to it, or two components, two sides of it. If you want to think about it as a coin, it has like a real, quote unquote, a real physical world aspect to it, and then the digital interpretation of it on the other side.
Right. So a practical piece of non-fungible might be that it's not exactly like a currency. It's a thing itself, and it's not divisible. Is one of the side effects of being non-fungible.
Correct. Exactly. You can't actually take it into more than basically two pieces, or it's really one identification of two pieces, right? The digital aspect, or the digital manifestation of what's actually a physical piece, right? So together they create one thing. It is not divisible.
Right. Excellent. So Daniel, if you would give us a working definition of a decentralized identifier, or a DID.
Yeah, so decentralized identifiers, as opposed to current decentralized identifiers like email addresses or domain names, are identifiers that you own, or an entity owns, wholly and separately from any other reliant party, like a provider or some sort of website that hosts it for them. These are identifiers that are typically non-transferable. Some have those properties. They're owned by who created them for their whole lifetime, and they're assumed to be yours, right? Because identity itself is typically not transferable, right? Your identity is not something that you can just gift to someone else. So these DIDs have all the properties of decentralization as blockchain tokens. They just are purposed differently, and they enable you to do things like log in maybe without a Google or Facebook login. Maybe you can log in with an ID that you own for once.
That's awesome. Okay, two more. Christina, if you'll give us a working definition of smart contracts, which heavily relate, of course, to NFTs.
Absolutely. So smart contracts meaning they're digitally signed or digitally traceable back to an individual or an entity that actually binds to a thing, right? It binds multiple things to kind of the beginning. You can trace it from start to end. So the way I think about it is almost like I buy my car. You could always go to Carfax, trace it from start to end, who owned it, when it was serviced. It actually has the whole life cycle of the vehicle that's actually managed and maintained. And so the smart contract is a binding thing between one or more entities and allows traceability to the purpose of completing a function or some kind of an outcome.
Awesome. And Daniel, our final definition here of verifiable credential.
Yeah, so verifiable credential, it sounds kind of official, but really in the end, it's it's a document format for being able to encapsulate some sort of data and sign over it from some source, right? So think about like, you have Alice and she goes to school at a university. The degree that she might get is a digital proof by the source, the university, that says, we believe we're going to confer upon you the fact that you've graduated with this degree, right? So you could put any piece of data inside of a credential, and really it's about, do you trust who issued the credential? It could be issued by one or more parties, and because trust is always an evaluation that a verifier or a person relying on the credential sort of uses to assess the world, it's always in the eye of the beholder. So you might trust a source and another person might not trust that source. It's just a framework for being able to make trusted assertions over data.
Started. Christina, what do you think is the sweet spot of NFTs? What do NFTs do well?
I think what NFTs do well is allow the public to understand certain aspects of our digital identity. So for example, I can identify myself when I'm hanging out with my friends as a runner because I'm a big runner, right? So I could actually have an NFT that digitally represents my running, whether it's my sub-4 time, because when you're a marathon runner, like everybody's holy grail is getting under 4 hours, or if it identifies me as the digital policy consultant when I'm at work, it allows me to express myself through a digital identity of my choosing. And so I think that NFTs are really great for that. From an individual perspective. And then of course, everybody's heard the hype in terms of artwork, collectibles, et cetera. But I like to think that that's sort of the surface and that's the shiny stuff. And under the surface, it allows us to express other things. For example, you might want to own an NFT of a character in a sitcom, right? That allows you to specifically own that character. Either as an investment or as an expression of who you are. And so anything that allows us to publicly express an identity, a sentiment, a feeling, a piece of artwork, something funny maybe that you've recorded. It doesn't have to be a static thing. It could be a video, like a TikTok video that you decide to turn into an NFT. But anything that's sort of fun, interesting, publicly exposed that you feel comfortable exposing. Right. So this is not intended to be like Christina Podnar, my marriage certificate necessarily, unless you really want the world to see that. It really is supposed to be a public aspect or an interpretation of something that you want to share.
Excellent. Daniel, what do VCs, what's the sweet spot of verifiable credentials?
Yeah, I would say any trusted assertion from yourself, just to kind of level set, you can create a verifiable credential that you self-sign, sort of your assertion to the world, and you can make them very public. So you could, as Christina was noting, you could actually have a VC sign with your DID that says I'm a runner, and then you could publish that widely, right, in relation to an ID that people knew. And they could say Christina's saying she's a runner. She could also, go to a race, right, that's probably being held by some sort of organization. And whenever she crosses the finish line, someone, times her in, and then they issue her a credential that says, you ran this race in this time, right? And she can publish that widely, or she could keep it very private. The interesting thing about accomplishments and personal identities, they're not transferable. VCs have this really wonderful property, and it's actually really important, because if Christina was to sort of transfer her time of 3 hours and 50 minutes to someone else, they actually wouldn't have run the race in 3 hours and 50 minutes. So it's an important aspect to think about with NFTs. And I would say that the sweet spot for DIDs is every single use case that doesn't require unfettered market sales, secondary sales. So some good examples of that might be completely anonymous sales of points for things, completely anonymous. And I touched a third rail here, but drug sales, right? You want drug sales to be something that's completely unfettered secondary market where there's no one involved, right? Some examples of the opposite where you don't need unfettered secondary markets is like Airbnb. I want to give someone a key to my Airbnb, and it's, yes, I'm selling them access, but I want revocability. I want control. I am, after all, the owner. I'm not going to throw my key out there into the ether, no pun intended, and just have it be saleable without my knowledge, right? So I would say that DIDs have a wide berth and they encompass many use cases.
All right, thank you so much for watching. If you would like more information on specific use cases and why you might want to choose NFTs or DIDs over the other, I highly encourage you to watch the full hour-long discussion. which these clips are taken from, and that'll be linked in the description below. We do have more educational style videos like this on the way. So if you want to learn more about decentralized identity, be sure to subscribe to the Indicio channel, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one.